I grew up a pretty normal kid, youngest of two boys. Parents are even still married, beaver cleaver-ish, pretty active, pretty happy, with one pretty big difference. Was born with PFFD, which essentially means my left femur and left hip did not develop properly, so that leg was quite a bit smaller than the other. Few surgeries and a couple summers on crutches improved that dramatically and allowed me to be as active as I really wanted to be. We hunted when I was young, cliff jumped. I was much dumber then. Rock climbed. I was thinner then, so I could actually do that. Water skied, although I'd say that sort of. We played a lot of wiffle ball in the backyard and basketball and football. I even wrestled and had a little bit of success in that. But I ended up realizing at some point that I was also born with one other big difference, and that was a pretty large chip that still resides on my shoulder. And those alone can be somewhat of a dangerous thing, but if they're coupled with hard work and focus, they can be pretty powerful. And luckily for me, I was around a lot of hardworking people. My grandparents weren't rich. This is a great photo of hunting for dinner, not for sport. I had a grandfather that hitchhiked across the U.S. to volunteer for World War II, a brother that volunteered for and then ended up going to Iraq for a tour. And of course, watching my parents go to work every day at the patient care office, day in and day out. 6 to 7 days a week, year in and year out. So I was always around it. And during the childhood, I was also introduced to skiing. And this was the first time where I felt like the playing field was leveled for me. And immediately was in love with skiing and then ski racing. And then had success in this. Won a handful of junior national championships. And really started to think I was pretty hot shit. This is the best graphic I could find, sorry. The problem with thinking that you're an emoji is that you tend to stop doing the hard work and the things that make you better at something. And so when I moved from the junior division to the open division, I just got crushed. It was pretty embarrassing. And at the time, I was working for Fred Trinkle at CSI. He was the winningest college coach at any level at that point. And so I was again surrounded by people that were hardworking and successful. And when Fred decided to leave, that seemed like a fortuitous time for me to go. And so I went ski racing and tried to spend as much time on snow as I could. 150 days a year or so on snow. Some days more serious than others. And if I wasn't on snow training, I was in the gym or I was on the bike running stairs. And that chip on my shoulder with some hard work and quite a bit of focus was moving me towards making the U.S. ski team. This is a collage that I'd created and I hung over the toilet in my bathroom. And so I had to look at these inspirational quotes and or graphics every morning and every time I went to the John. And I know what you're thinking. How old was he when he made a collage? But that was part of focusing the chip, and eventually did get named to the U.S. team. And then a year later was in Nagano for the Paralympic Games. We had an incredibly strong team, 5 of us for 3 spots, which is why I only raced 1 event in Nagano. These guys won all 4 golds and swept the giant slalom. I don't think there has ever been a team before or since that was as good as these guys. This, for me, was what not winning looked like. I crashed in the second run of my event, but I can say that crashing was better than finishing 10th. And I wasn't really worried about the time. I thought, there'll be more Paralympic Games. Pretty ignorant at the time. And realistically, it shouldn't have been. But I had a really good year the next year. I started to figure some things out and was skiing really well. Ended up at the end of the season 15th overall in the world. And again, reverted back to, I guess you can pick, thinking I was pretty hot shit. And this led to a serious derailment of the trajectory that I had been on. And so I really came off the rails in how well I was skiing, my fitness, what I was doing. I wasn't adapting very well to the changes in equipment, and really had a nosedive at that point. And while I fixed it and started to dig myself out of that hole, I essentially ran out of runway. And when I didn't make the 2002 Paralympic team, I retired from ski racing. At the time, it was a pretty easy shift. I'd already been working with my folks at the patient care. We started making some parts for ourselves. This is an old, rough prototype that we have since refined, thankfully. And so my job shifted from being on snow every day to being in one of these most of the time. A million miles of flying and sales calls and workshops and trade shows to get the business growing. And lo and behold, if you have more than 2 nickels together and you travel a bunch, you start to put on weight, which was something I couldn't do as a ski racer. And at the time, different from now, I wasn't really comfortable with getting heavier. I didn't want to be fatter. Now I've fully embraced it. So I'd done a triathlon towards the end of my skiing career. I did some other events like Muddy Buddy and thought, well, this will be a fun hobby. And I had some friends that were doing elite level paratriathlon, and so I got roped into going to US Nationals and then Worlds. And by luck, and I will stress luck, ended up on the podium at my first Worlds in 3rd. But I knew then and there that that wasn't going to get me there again. And so the next season I had to change my training and change my setup. And I started what became a long history of experimentation and adjustment and refinement. And the next year, and I'll say with a little bit of luck again, I won my first world championship. But even I no more than took the medal off my neck and knew that they were right behind me and they were going to be a lot faster the next year. And so I looked at everything I could. I played around with the length of the crank arm on my bike on my amputated side. I played with different prosthetic feet that were on the market. I changed up the setup of my bike leg. Definitely one of the benefits of working for a prosthetic company. And whether it was nutrition or my training program or whatever it was, I continually every year played around with that so that I could continue to improve and get faster. And won my second world championship. This is what almost throwing up looks like, by the way. And then my third, and I continued to adjust and improve to win my fourth. And finally, my fifth and final in Budapest. And at this point, I was pretty burned out. A couple decades worth of 2-a-days and 3-a-days. And this seemed like a good time to hang it up. And I was, still running a company. And but it didn't take me long till I was on the internet looking at World Cup results and World Championship results, and so I only took a year off and came back. And this took a huge amount of effort. I wish I could have graphed this at the time. I think it would take me about 6 hours or so after the race to put on all the weight that it took me 6 months to lose. Apparently beer does that. But I was able to sneak back onto the podium one more time and even raced one more year after this. But this would be the last time I'd be on the podium. And at this point, I grossly underestimated just how burned out I was. I was pretty done. Running in the morning, working, swimming at lunch, working, biking in the evening, and then doing some sort of combination of that on the weekends, all while avoiding the beer so that I could lose the weight that I needed to lose. So at that point, I was pretty done, but I was continuing to work at and grow a company. But I also had one other change. My parents had been working towards retirement. They were going to sell the patient care, and that sale fell through. And so around that same time, I became the sucker that was going to run the patient care as well. So now I was running 2 companies and trying to race as well. And I made a weird mental shift at the time that I really can't explain it. I had it in my head that somehow money was going to be the thing that I was the only thing that I was judged by. It was going to be all sales and all profits, and so this was the big thing. I stopped short of slicking back my hair, but the thought process was there. And even though I was running 2 companies and had a lot more staff, I continued to do things the same way I'd always done it. I hadn't adjusted anything. And so my analogy for this is that if doing things the same way you've always done it is so great, why aren't we all sitting here in diapers? How productive would we be if we never had to go to the bathroom again? It's not. It's not a good place to be. It'd be a smelly room. So at that point, I ended up spending a lot of nights on this. And I don't say sleeping on the couch. I just mean laying there thinking about work, stressing about work. What fire am I going to put out tomorrow or today? I was unhappy. My staff was unhappy. And so I finally realized I needed to take a step back and look and see what was going on. I needed to decide what I wanted. I needed to figure out what I wanted these companies to be and how I was going to fit inside of them. And I realized that I wanted us to get back to the place where we had been, working on innovative projects like this, developing the first prosthetic for Tom Whitaker, the first amputee to summit Mount Everest, working with amputees to get them to do whatever they want to do, whether it's skiing or gardening, give them the same opportunities I had because my prosthetic always fit well. And getting patients to come back to us year in and year out because we're the ones that provided great care and great devices. This little guy here is now in his 30s. This picture is a couple decades old. So I also had some other more organizational challenges to take care of. We needed to centralize fabrication so we could keep a closer eye on the quality. I needed to shift us from a single practitioner company that owned it to a multiple practitioner company, and they weren't the owners. We had to switch from paper charts to digital. We had to deal with the new regulations of Medicare. So there was a lot to take care of. There were a lot of challenges. And this was going to take a lot of change. And not everybody likes change. And the hard part with change is sometimes you end up taking some steps back before it gets better. And not all people are willing to go through change. So on top of all these challenges, now I could add employee turnover to this because not everybody was going to get out of this hole. But I finally had learned something from my past. In the old days in racing, when things weren't going well, I'd isolate myself. But this time around, I realized I needed to expand. I needed to change. I needed to adapt. And I needed to learn more and listen more and read more. EO was one of those examples. And I needed to come up with a plan. This is a PowerPoint slide from an Army presentation on how they were going to win the war in Afghanistan. How'd that go? So when I saw this in the New York Times, I realized I needed a simpler and better plan than this one. I also needed a clear vision on where we were going, where I wanted to go, where the companies were going to go. But even harder than coming up with a vision was realizing that I was going to have to preach this, to say this over and over and over again, because it just doesn't sink in on the first try. I had to become, and still have to be, the chief preaching officer. And outside of the operational items, I also wanted to look at the culture of the company. I certainly didn't want to, nor do I think I could work as hard or as much as my parents did. I definitely knew my staff didn't want to work that much. So we wanted to change how we functioned. So we added more holidays. We added more PTO. Nobody really works on Christmas Eve anyway, so why be open, was how I looked at it. We also started spending a lot more on education and training and team building and teamwork. But no, I'm not doing trust falls. I also looked at our work week. We went from 40 hours a week to 36 because I really don't think most people can do an 8-hour day, 5 days a week. I'd rather have you more engaged in less time. I believe that the 40-hour work week is probably why Facebook is so successful. That and they're stealing your identity. This is shamelessly stolen from the internet, so it could all be false, but I do know that a more engaged employee is a more productive employee. I also implemented profit sharing. I wanted people to do better as the company did better. It wasn't going to be all about us. We also went dog friendly. This has no bearing on production whatsoever. This is simply because I typically like dogs more than I like people. And the other big change was for me personally. I had to get out of the way. I was hiring people. We do payroll every 2 weeks. So why am I thinking that I should be the guy that does all this stuff? I'm not even that good at anything, except racing, and that was a long time ago. So I had to get out of their way and let them do the job so that they could make mistakes on their own, and then I could help them fix it, and we could not make the same mistakes again. One legacy I didn't change is we make everything here. And this graphic is a little bit false. It should just say made in Boise. We make everything within about 20 miles of our office. I believe, or we believe, that a corporation is more than just making money for its owners. And we employ a whole lot more people because we keep it here than it's just on our payroll. We could save thousands by shipping this overseas, but no company's mission statement actually reads to make as much money as we can for the owners. A corporation should be a better citizen than we are some of the times. We now have a company that's okay with change. There's still a little resistance depending on what it is, but now there are people that are bringing me ideas and suggestions, instead of me having to push all of them to them. And that allows me to focus on what's most important, the legacy that we want to leave behind. I don't want my parents' tombstone to say, created great company, let kid run into the ground. I want mine to say, I made a difference. Thanks.